Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Hyman. I am a senior fellow and the director of planning at the National Security Institute at George Mason University's School of Law School. And on behalf of MSI, we wanted to just say we're delighted to be co-sponsoring today's event with the School of Foreign Affairs at Georgetown University. And we're especially grateful to the Mara Center for hosting us today. It's a lovely setting for what will be, I know, a very interesting conversation. Just a few words on the National Security Institute at George Mason. We are a law and policy center. We're very much focused on national security topics, as our name would suggest. In particular, we're focused on cyber technology, military affairs, and then international affairs. And we're really interested in thinking about and coming forward with practical solutions to the problems that we face as a country. So with that, that's the NSI commercial. If you want to know more about us, you can type in nationalsecurity.gmu.edu, and you can see all the programming that we're doing. Events like these are typical for us. We work with a lot of institutions around town and across the country on topics of importance, such as the relationship with Turkey. And with that, I would like to introduce today's moderator for the panel. Paula Doyle is a national security and foreign policy expert with over 30 years of experience within the diplomatic and intelligence communities. Currently, Ms. Doyle teaches a class in Turkey at the Levant and the Levant here at Georgetown. She's also an NSI fellow. Previously, she served as the Associate Deputy Director for Operations Technology within the Central Intelligence Agency. Before that, she served as a Deputy National Counterintelligence Executive within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where she led efforts with the White House to shape and implement insider threat protection programs. Prior to that, she served within the CIA in Asia and the Levant and worked on counterproliferation issues. Ms. Doyle holds a BA in International Affairs and a BS in International Business from the University of Colorado Boulder.
Thanks, Matt.
You're welcome.
Thank you all so much for being here, and I also want to welcome those who are Zooming in. I guess we have some Zoom personnel from around the planet. Today's panel will explore the extent to which Turkey's unfolding relations with Russia, Iran, Syria, and Libya have harmed U.S. relationships along the Black Sea and the Greater Levant. And by the Greater Levant, I'm talking about the definition of the Levant that's the whole Eastern Mediterranean, not just the tiny little sliver that sometimes the dictionary will lead you to on the Eastern Med. But before our distinguished guests speak, I'm going to take a few moments to give some historical framework for what's going on in the Middle East. These are my views, and I challenge the panel to push back on me, and I challenge you all to push back on me too. And when I teach my class, I'm very careful, as my former students know, not to betray my own views. My view as a professor here is to teach and not to tell you what to think, or but better yet, how to find resources to help you think through what you think. So let's take the clock back a little bit. When Catherine the Great began winning wars in the 1770s along the Black Sea against the mighty Ottoman Empire, King George III was busy doing what? He was focusing on the American colonies. His foreign policy experts, however, were worried at the time that if left unchecked, Catherine the Great and Potemkin would seize Constantinople and control the Bosphorus. They would control the Balkans. They would control the Eastern Mediterranean. And their deep secret concerns in Britain was that they would impact British trade relations and control over India. As the Ottoman Empire became the sick man of Europe, Britain and France cautiously asked what would become of what they called the Eastern Question. Subsequent Russian-Turkish wars, the Crimean War, multiple Balkan wars, and World War I exposed the dangers of great power conflicts and tangled webs of secret alliances. They emphasized and also this constant geostrategic importance of the Bosphorus, and they laid bare the the wide range of deeply held ethnic, cultural, and religious grievances that all of those wars we just talked about, all of those wars and peace treaties and occupations failed to resolve. Then we know that World War II came, and then the Cold War, and then post-Soviet NATO enlargement. US-led strategies in the 20th century build geopolitical, military, economic, and collective defense alliances. Containment in NATO enlargement policies focused on countering the big strategic threats, and they continue to be the Soviet Union and Russia, a rising Iran, terrorism, and other destabilizing and destructive influences. The US and NATO placed nuclear, missile, naval, air, and intelligence capabilities in Turkey to protect the alliance's unstable southeastern flank. Containment in NATO enlargement policies, however, often did not align neatly with other vital national security challenges that arose after World War II. So we created tailored policies for the Middle East peace process, the Cyprus problem, and the violent breakup of Yugoslavia. These more narrowly tailored policies and initiatives acknowledged that they too did not resolve those deeply held ethnic, cultural, and religious grievances. And those grievances continue to fester and grow and morph all along the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. And Turkey was not immune to any of those, either within Turkey or alongside her borders. Between 1952 and 2001, the US and NATO constantly traded off. How do we measure our relationship? How do we balance it, considering Turkey's national interests and the national interests of our own alliance? Then came 9/11, and that thing that we call the war in Iraq. Sustained US wars and lethal counterterrorism activities fueled large ethnic and religious groups that increasingly demanded power sharing arrangements, recognition, autonomy, and independence. Examples came from disparate Kurdish populations in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. They came from over 6 million Palestinian refugees in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. They came from about 7 million displaced Syrian refugees in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon. And now they come from newly empowered majority Shia populations across Iraq and Syria. The US and NATO had worked so carefully to navigate these highly charged shoals of Turkey's Kurdish question, but by 2000, we too had to confront the fact that there were about 14 million Turkish Kurds. In a region where the enemy of my enemy is my friend, post 9/11 alliances across the Levant shifted very quickly and became very pragmatic. Iraqi, Kurdish, PUK, KDP, and Peshmerga forces proved able and quite willing to fight against al-Qaeda in Iraq and other successor affiliates in the region. Iran, meanwhile, had backed Hezbollah, and they were suddenly on the same side of US-led coalition forces that were fighting against ISIS. In all of my years of service, nothing was more complicated than 2015. As ISIS grabbed more territory and established a caliphate, the US aligned in 2015 with several Syrian Kurdish groups, a portion of which was affiliated with PKK terrorists. Ankara flatly rejected the US decision to partner with Syrian Kurds, alleging that all of them were affiliated with PKK. Russia. So what's happening in Russia? So Russia, meanwhile, had exploited all of this post 9/11 period by temporarily, first of all, invading South Ossetia in Georgia in 2008. It was a temporary 5 to 8 day invasion, and then they pulled out. As though the clock had turned back to 1774, or perhaps even the Soviet Cold War, Moscow invaded eastern Ukraine in 2013, annexed Crimea in 2014, and assumed control of Sevastopol for its Black Sea Fleet. Moscow then grew more bold. It deployed air, land, sea, and cyber capabilities to Syria in 2015, followed suit more recently in Libya. More importantly, Russia drove deep wedges between the US and Turkey by selling S-400 missile systems in 2019. Within a few short years, and really without fighting NATO. Moscow regained what Catherine had won in 1774 and what Stalin regained after World War II. Eastern Ukraine, the Azov Sea, Crimea, and Sevastopol are once again under the care, control, and custody of Mother Russia. Challenges to US leadership and influence in the vast East did not stop with Russia. Iran had established Lebanese Hezbollah in the early 1980s, and Tehran actively exploited conditions in Lebanon, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, and Syria throughout the post-9/11 era. By the end of 2019, the Supreme Leader and Lebanese Hezbollah had deployed troops, special operations personnel, military advisors, and humanitarian workers to every nation along Turkey's border. So how did Russia and Iran manage to encircle NATO's southeastern flank so quickly and so decisively between 2013 and 2020? The panel is here, along with myself. I'll be happy to take some of your questions on that, but we're here today to kind of dig into this issue. As a scene setter, I have my own observations about our focus on counterterrorism for nearly 20 years. And also on the impact of Chinese modernization and Russian influence in European and United States elections. But I think it's also really important to consider that Tehran and Moscow proved quite capable of befriending, bedazzling, and intimidating Erdoğan. For me, the lessons going forward are twofold. I welcome the views of the panels as we talk through some of the questions. We'll be guiding through them. First, my point of view would be we cannot allow to be so easily outmaneuvered by Russia and Iran in the East. And secondly, we have to sharpen our understanding of the factors that made Erdoğan susceptible to the enemy statecraft methods that he has fallen to. When we look at the Eastern question as a whole ecosystem, I believe we see Russia on the move and Iran digging in. We see Turkey adrift and falling to pressures it may or may not be able to manage by itself. I see an urgent need for American leadership and an integrated strategy that addresses the whole of the East, not just little transactional pieces at any given time based on a certain crisis. But those are my views. You have before you some of the most distinguished people I have had the honor of working with, working alongside, and meeting in the academic world. I had begun writing my piece today with John Gannon. So Dr. Gannon, raise your hand. I will introduce you. Dr. Gannon and I had the great fortune to work together. I learned from him when he led the CIA's Office of European Analysis. He then became the Deputy Director of Intelligence, then the Assistant DCI for Analysis and Production. And not quite content yet, he had a lot more to serve when he became the chairman of the National Intelligence Council. He then went on to serve in the White House. He was the intelligence lead that helped establish the Department of Homeland Security, became the staff director of the House Select Committee on Homeland Security. He's had so many distinguished positions since he retired and joined the CSS program in 2004 as an adjunct professor. But I would just name that one of them is that he is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Next up, excuse me while I find what happened with my notes. Just going to have to remember this by heart. Next up is Lisel Hintz. Lisel is a assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, the Center of the Strategic Advanced Intelligence Studies.
School of Advanced
School. I should do much better with my notes.
Too many acronyms.
Too many acronyms in the science world.
It all means the same thing, exactly.
She's done extensive field work in Turkey, and through that, she has developed an expertise in power consolidation of power in foreign policy and the notion of identity in the process of helping us think through someone as complicated as Erdoğan, someone as complicated as Putin, someone as complicated as the supreme leader, put them all together, and I'm really eager to hear what Lisel has to say. Maya comes to us. Arakon has such good news for us today from Turkey. Maya was born in Istanbul, and some of my former students here were also born in Turkey. So you may or may not know the news. I will let her deliver the news for you today. Maya attended university in Istanbul, then she went to the University of Strasbourg, where she got her master's and PhD. She did her postdoctoral work at the University of Paris. She has a long list of things she works on, terrorism, violence, but she's also a big advocate for human rights and in the whole notion that she had to leave Ankara, or had to leave Turkey in August of 2016 kind of speaks for itself. The announcement that I think she and only she should make should come from her on behalf of her colleagues in Turkey. And finally, Jim Danoy is joining us today from the National Security Institute. He's recently retired after a long and distinguished career at the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he served in so many capacities. He was President Obama's PDB briefer in 2010-2011. He has served as the Director of National Intelligence's National Intelligence Manager for Europe and NATO. He has served a number of very senior positions in the DIA as the Defense Intelligence Officer for NATO and Europe. He's carried those areas of expertise to assignments in Brussels and in Stuttgart, where he was the personal DNI representative and defense advisor to the commander of EUCOM and the commander of SACEUR. He holds a presidential rank, distinguished presidential rank. So these are the panel members we have brought together for you. I'm going to guide us through a few questions and leave time for you all in the audience to ask your own questions. And I will begin, if the panel is ready, with the first question. Presidents invariably want to know how and why foreign counterparts make decisions. What motivates them? How can the U.S. work to influence desired outcomes? So we'll begin with 3 lines of inquiry on this one. The 3 questions are, we'll direct these to Lisel and to John. What makes Erdoğan tick? John will recognize that that's probably one of the most common leadership questions CIA leadership analysts or even a case officer, certainly in Chief of Station, is asked on a regular basis. What makes the person we're going to engage with make the decisions tick? What makes him tick at home and abroad is question 1. Second is, what does he want to achieve? And can he get it done on his own? And third, what's he afraid of? So with that, John, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. First of all, thank you, Paula, very much for arranging all of this, and it's great to be with Jim again, and Maya and Lisa. Let me say, in addition to the roles that I played that you mentioned, Paula, I was back in Turkey a couple of years ago, and I stayed at the Farah Palace Hotel, that some of you may know. It's right on the Bosporus. It's an actually elegant hotel now, but for most of my career, when I would go to Turkey, I would stay there, and it was right next door at the time to our Consul General, the U.S. Consul General, which is an old Italian villa, which was quite beautiful and very easy hop and jump. But the Farah Palace Hotel opened up onto the Bosporus. It was beautiful, but it was in major decline most of the time that I was there. And then somebody sighted a rat there, and luckily for my CIA training, that didn't bother me at all. But we were forbidden to go there, but I kept going. Anyways, so they closed the hotel and for several years in the past decade to renovate it, and they did renovate it, and I went back with my wife. It's all very elegant, but to show how long I have been going back to Turkey, I actually briefed the new staff about the old hotel, where the picture of Ataturk had been and going around. So I have been involved with Turkey for a long time. So I will try not to make my views known or my biases known, but everything I say is empirically based. So a long time and a long relationship with Turkey. I can remember back in the 80s when I was working in European analysis, when I came in on a Sunday, because Turgut Özal, the president of Turkey, had died of a heart attack, and that was actually a major crisis. That was a time when our relationship with Turkey in the context of NATO was extremely important, and we certainly did not foresee some of the challenges that we would be facing today. Let me also say, to the questions about Erdoğan, I want to admit to you that if you go back to the 90s, and it was the early 2000s when he established the AK party, I knew that he had been involved with the Welfare Party and was a very militant Islamic leader, if not Islamist, in his earlier days. But he had kind of become chastened to an extent when he established the AK party. He did it with a professed commitment that this would not be a party committed to violence. He had actually served some time in jail. So I actually saw him as a leader. And he, by the way, he came in and he was seriously engaging with the European Union. And he seemed to believe, actually more than I did, actually, that Turkey would make progress in accession to the European Union. And he certainly was extremely cooperative with the United States with regard to counterterrorism, particularly after 9/11. So there was no question about where his commitments were there. But also, of course, he came in with Turkey having had a very strong reputation in support of NATO during the entire Cold War. So there was a lot going for him. I actually thought that Erdoğan might emerge as a real statesman in the region at a time when statesmanship was really needed. Well, I want to make a couple of points about why all that didn't happen and why I certainly had to refine my view of Erdoğan. He certainly was a chastened Islamist, but I think he remained and still remains today. He's certainly very committed to his roots and his education, certainly his primary and secondary education in Islamic schools. And the sense that he would open the society to more Islamic influence was almost a given. But I don't think I was prepared for some of his responses to some of the both domestic and then to the regional challenges that he faced in terms of his very decisive and authoritarian responses. So he certainly is a Turkish nationalist. There's no question about that. But he has approached problems with a kind of, I would call, zero-sum, even vindictive view towards those who challenge him and oppose him. He's been repressive with regard to his political opponents. I think any of us who recall the 2016 coup attempt, and by coups are not new in Turkey, by the way, but his reaction to the extent that he rounded up civil servants and military people, the breadth and depth of that roundup certainly did, I would have to say, shock some of us who had been watching him in Turkey for some time. At the same time, the way he managed the Khashoggi incident with regard to Saudi Arabia, where he had been working to improve relations, showed that there was still a kind of a humanitarian element to the way he approached the region. He did the same thing with regard to the Palestinians in their relationship with Israel. And also with regard to the refugee crisis that emerged and has had a major impact in the way Turkey looks at the region and has to deal with the challenges of the refugees coming in the direction of Turkey. And I would just make a point there that if there's 3 million refugees that have already gone into Turkey. Now there's another almost million waiting coming on Erbil. Look at that number with regard to the 80 million people now living, or 84 million people now living in Turkey. If we took that many people in a country our size, the proportion would be that we would have to take about 14+ million people into our. So this is a serious issue that Erdoğan never thought he would have to deal with to the extent that he does. And even today, as I came down here listening to Al Jazeera, where I could, there's the only place I go, I've got continuous news about what's happening in Erbil. The Russians and the Syrians are back to bombing hospitals and schools to drive what is left of the civilian population out of Erbil, and they all, of course, head for the Turkish border. So he's got he's got domestic problems that he's facing, and you know, if you go back a few years when the Kurds were actually came into the one election that came into the Turkish parliament, and he was unwilling to accept that. Again, this is the zero-sum game that he plays, and you know, changed the election so that he could drive out the Kurds. And of course, his behavior with the Kurds at the border, again, has been zero-sum. He simply will not tolerate. And that is the kind of humorless, decisive way that we have come to see him operate. But I also want to say, in terms of others to their comments, that he also, I think, would tell us now, and that he's also dealt with a very rough neighborhood that changed in very negative ways with regard to Turkish interests. And his ability to deal with those crises has to do with NATO, which I think he would tell you he has less confidence in now than he had in the past. He would tell you that his serious efforts in the early 90s to work the EU accession actually was met ultimately with the kinds of concentration that he has interpreted as simply it's never going to happen, and that it's not just the fact that the size of the Turkish leadership of the workforce is so large that it could not be integrated into the European Union. He believes that it is a racist reaction on the part of major European countries to accepting an Islamic country of the size and influence of Turkey. So he has a certain amount of resentment against those Western institutions to which he believes Turkey has been committed to, but to which Turkey has not benefited to the extent, especially in the current crisis that it's facing, that it needs to. And with regard, I'd say, to Russia also, we will have the opportunity to talk about the S-400 missile defense battery system that Erdoğan was very candid about. That I ordered it, it's arrived, and it's been tested. And he will defend it on the basis that it didn't tailor to the particular needs of his country, and that he was not going to get through the U.S. Congress the kind of help he needs, and he desperately. So he's got an explanation. We can talk about what the implications are. Obviously, he has presented problems for NATO and for the United States, particularly with regard to their relationship with Russia, in terms of how it impacts on on NATO and his membership in it. But with that, the final point I'll make is he is a Turkish nationalist. He is a very authoritative leader. There's no question about that. And certainly, if you were a journalist or an academic, you would not have a lot of sympathy for the way he has treated your colleagues, or in the political opposition at all. But if you recognize the neighborhood that he is in and the challenge that he is facing, I think we all need to step back and look at the context. And one of the points I'm going to make in all of my comments is that if I can actually I articulate Erdoğan's strategy with the way he's dealing with foreign policy issues now, I can't articulate the way the United States is dealing with the problem. So in the absence of a U.S. strategy in the region is hurting NATO a lot more than Erdoğan is, and we'll have a chance to talk about that. So,
Here. Yeah. Thank you, John. Oh, Dr.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Paula, for inviting me. Thank you all for coming for this great opportunity. I agree a lot with what my colleague said, but I'm going to have a couple of points of difference. In terms of the specific question of what makes Erdoğan tick, I would say I teach a course on psychology and foreign policy decision-making over at SICE. So we look at things like emotion and personality and experience and how you were raised and how that shapes your decision-making and how that shapes your interests. When we think about what makes Erdoğan tick, I think it comes down to power. And I will say that this is based on empirical evidence, but I think that my bias may show through. But I don't think it's necessarily a bias. It's the take that I have based on the empirical evidence that I gathered. And I also want to say that I'm thrilled for the announcement that Maya's going to make. I would say that Erdoğan is motivated by power, enrichment, identity, and fear. Erdoğan came up through the National Outlook movement. As Dr. Gannon was saying, he was a rising star in the movement. He was the mayor of Istanbul, which is the jewel, the crown, whatever Saudi Orientalist metaphor you want to use for what Istanbul is. And that showed that he had a lot of power within the movement. He was, in fact, jailed for reciting a poem that was seen to incite Islamist hatred. So he has a martyr factor that he brings with him. He's able to tell a narrative of victimization to a gigantic swath of the population that was told that they were backward, they were Eastern, they were rural, they were uneducated, and they were too pious to be part of elite society. So I think he brings quite a lot of that with him. Now there's a question of which, when does a man of the people who lives in a 1,100 room palace and whose wife has Birkin bags and drinks dragon fruit smoothies is no longer the man of the people, right? That's the enrichment part. And as you were saying, the journalists who report on that are in jail or were in jail. In terms of identity, I would differ a bit. I don't think Erdoğan is a Turkish nationalist. I think that Erdoğan has allied with the Nationalist Action Party, the ethnic nationalists. There's different kinds of nationalism in Turkey. There's ethnic nationalism, there's secular nationalism, there's religious nationalism. I would say that if you look at Erdoğan's speeches, he doesn't actually say Turk until like 2014, 15, 16, when the ceasefire with the PKK breaks down. That's when he starts talking about the Türk milleti, the Turkish nation. And that's when he pivots away from the peace process with the Kurds to aligning with nationalist parties. And now, absolutely, this yerli ve milli, everything has to be local and everything is grounded in what is Turkish is extremely important for his electoral success. He wouldn't have won the 2018 presidential elections without the nationalists. But I would say that I characterize, and my bias is from a book, but I characterize his identity as Ottoman Islamist. Which in fact, because there wasn't a red line against Turkish identity, against Kurdish identity, opened up the space for protracted, prolonged conversations and peace overtures with the Kurds. But once, and again, I take this point absolutely, once someone defies him, that closes the door, and the Kurds became a political threat in 2015, and hence, more complicated than that, but hence the breakdown of the peace process. So I would say identity is a big motivating factor in terms of how he sees both his role in domestic politics, increasing the space for Islam in society, establishing a more patriarchal order, a more authoritarian order for sure. And then in terms of the role in the region, having a much more activist, assertive role for Turkey, particularly in Muslim countries, former Ottoman territories. For him, this comes from Turkey's previous role as inheritor of the Ottoman legacy, as home of the Sultanate and the Caliphate. He invokes a lot of sultanic references in his speeches. A lot of people think that's just rhetoric, but I think it also drives his vision of grandiose presence for Turkey in the region. He also, I think, is trying to, or sees Turkey as an aspiring Sunni leader in the region. When it comes to identity, what is interesting about Erdoğan is that he can be quite pragmatic in the sense that he can invoke a pan-Islamic narrative when he's working with Iran, for example, or other Shia populations. When he was best friends, not best friends, but like vacationing in Bodrum together, friends, with Bashar al-Assad. But then can pivot to a more sectarian line as well, right? Fear. Erdoğan is, here's a paradox. So Erdoğan is, from an institutional perspective, in the most powerful position he's ever been. He's got a consolidated executive presidency. He has control over everything from the central bank to the military, to a certain extent, to a number of other institutions, certainly the Supreme Electoral Council. From a political perspective, I would say he is in the most precarious position he's ever been. I think that he is making some erratic decisions. I think that the Istanbul elections, in which we have an opposition party member, Ekrem İmamoğlu, wins the first election, they get canceled, let's run it again. He wins again, probably with votes from some AKP members who were angry that the rule of law was subverted, frankly. And so I think that he is quite worried. I think that this gives Devlet Bahçeli, who is the Nationalist Action Party leader, some leverage in what's going on. You see him making some kind of, let's say, fiery speeches about what's going on in Idlib in Syria. I do think that's a huge calculation point, what's going on in Idlib. And so fear is Erdoğan's position, his precarious position. Fear is what happens if he gets out of power. I would bet my life that he is on the first plane to the Maldives or Qatar. I do not think that he wants to, pardon?
Indonesia.
Or Indonesia, it could be one of those three. So there, he faces a lot of repercussions if he does leave power, and those who succeed him are not of his consorts. So I think he's in an existential crisis at this point. I think he sees staying in political power necessary to remain alive and well in Turkey.
A theme that we could probably delve into with other personalities across the Levant and the Eastern question. I don't think it's unique to Erdoğan.
Not in the slightest.
Thank you all. The next question, I think we should proceed with Maya making her announcement, because we're going to talk a little bit about the Ottoman Empire and the comments, the teasing comments about Maya's going to make an announcement. Seems to be, this is the right time. Go ahead.
Actually, it's not an announcement, but this is something really just made me very happy this morning. I just cried out of happiness for the first time. My friends who have been in jail for complaining about overthrowing the regime had all acquitted this morning out of the Gezi trial. So one of my friends, Osman Kavala, who's a philanthropist, and he's a very, very well-known human actually from Europe and from America, has spent almost 900 days for nothing in jail. So he was released, and I was just so happy to see that. Maybe that's the beginning of some little changes in Turkey in terms of, inshallah, situation. So that is my news.
Thank you, Dr. Arakon. Okay, so here's question number 2. The Ottoman Empire and the modern Turkish Republic have long struggled to manage their debt, foreign reserves, inflation, trade deficits, and unemployment rates. The Sublime Porte and Ankara historically have historically sought large economic and military assistance packages from the United States, Britain, France, Germany, the World Bank, and the IMF. Western powers, when they declined, or when we paused to consider, or when we imposed harsh terms, often caused the Turks to turn to Moscow. Sometimes even Moscow turned Turkey down. After 9/11, this trend line with Russia began to evolve. By the 2010s, Erdoğan had opened far more channels with Moscow. So with that as a scene setter, the question for first Maya and then for Jim is, what factors led Ankara to pursue Russian energy deals, the Russian S-400s, and Russian-led talks over the future of Syria? Question 1. And question 2 is always our favorite. Where do we go from here? So Maya, you want to take a
Thank you. Actually, there are more than one reason why Erdoğan is moving away from Western values and getting closer with Russia and Putin. We can say that there are some mistakes maybe done by the United States, but also we just cannot consider this solely a problem of the Western bloc to push Erdoğan away. I believe that after a certain point, probably as of the Gezi events in 2013, where there was a huge popular uprising about this small park in the middle of Taksim Square in Istanbul, Erdoğan got scared, extremely scared. For the first time, he saw the power of the people against him and the opposition, and they were not organized by any kind of political parties. They were organized by themselves. It was a total civilian movement. So that was the actually turning point for the history of democracy in Turkey, because as of that date, he started to take, drastic measures to just, oppress any kind of protests or opposition or critics coming from to his regime and to his government and to his rule. And I believe that as of that moment also, it was to his, suited in his book to get closer to with an authoritarian regime than to get closer with, European or Western democracies, because he was determined to cut off with any kind of democratic situation and regime in order to pursue his own or to live his own system. So getting closer to Russia was kind of, I define it as the authoritarian fraternity. So he felt like he and Putin they have so many common grounds. So, if Erdoğan and if Turkey remained within the European club or within the European Union sphere of influence, he would have to respect democratic values, and Turkey would have been bound by democratic rules or measures of candidacy. So it didn't fit in his agenda. Instead, getting closer with an authoritarian government, authoritarian system, and using the excuses of being pushed away or I cannot find the right word. He played that card like saying we were betrayed by the United States and Western Bloc. So instead of trying to actually get back to the democratic system, he just moved away from that system, and it was to his good actually, because nobody asking for any accounts if you just do anything wrong in the democratic system. So I believe that, not that, of course, we have other factors like the United States allying with the Kurds in after the Iraq war. So Erdoğan didn't want a Kurdish autonomy or autonomous region in the southern front of Turkey. So United States refusal to extradite the Pennsylvania-based cleric Fethullah Gülen, actually accused of orchestrating the coup in 2016, was another point of resentment for Erdoğan, and but also I think since the invasion of Iraq, which paved the way for a more assertive Kurdish regional autonomy or authority, Turkey has been seeing the United States as a destabilizing factor in the Middle East and not an ally anymore. So Erdoğan believes that Americans either actively or encouraged or tacitly supported the 2016 coup by not extraditing Fethullah Gülen, and of course not taking the necessary measures or backing up Erdoğan, whereas Putin was one of the first leaders who called him on him right after the coup. So these are very important details for Erdoğan. And when Turkey was expelled from the American F-35 program, Putin right away proposed to replace that with Su-35 jets instead of So Putin is there like I'm your back, I'm your rock, and anytime he just Erdoğan stumbles in the region, Putin is there to back him up again. But the thing is that they're on the opposite sides in Syria. But even that factor cannot be a very big obstacle for Erdoğan to get closer to Russia. And but things have started to change since the Idlib conflict, because for the first time since the beginning of this rapprochement, Russian state news outlets published detailed accusations of Turkish role in establishing the al-Nusra terrorists in Syria. So, and they're, actually now saying Turkey is deploying of the mercenaries, Islamist mercenaries into Libya. So this is the first. It's important because it comes from the state-led news outlets. That's why it's totally just directly reflects what's going on in Kremlin. So I believe that being in European Union or being close to the democratic values really were not something really wanted by Erdoğan. He prefers to be closer to authoritarian rules because otherwise, now he doesn't give any account to anyone. And I agree with Lisel saying that his biggest fear is to lose power. Because if he ever loses power, if he's overthrown, first, there's a high chance that he's going to be sent to the International Court of Justice as war criminal, because it is proven that with evidence that he helped ISIS logistically and financially, and he's being actually promising a Turkish nationality and some kind of salary to the mercenaries that he is bringing from Syria to Libya. And he promised them they would be hospitalized in Turkey if they get wounded, or to be buried back in their homes, and Turkey will cover all these expenses. So if he loses power, he's going to be sent directly by to the International Court of Justice. But I believe that I agree with Lisel that before that he's going to take his private jet to fly to Indonesia, because he already transported his wealth, a huge part of his wealth, to Indonesian banks. So where do we go from now? I think Jim has things to tell you, but I never believed that sincerely and intimately he was he had ever democratic values. Once he said at the beginning of his career that the democracy is a streetcar, you just need to know where to get off. So he needed to just get rid of the military. I'm not supporting military intervention in any kind of politics, but doesn't mean that you get rid of the military just for instrumentalizing it for your own political purposes. First. Second, he got into bad terms with the European Union. Did you know that Turkey is on the wait list of a blacklist for tax fraud on the European Union? They just gave Turkey just 2 more years to just fix up everything. Otherwise, Turkey would go on the blacklist of the European, which means that you will never be a member of the European Union, which is totally fine for Erdoğan, because he doesn't care about the European Union or membership. And 3, as long as the European leaders will allow him and tolerate him for all the political human rights violations and all the political oppression he's been doing in Turkey, just for stopping the refugee crisis, because they have paid him 3 billion euros just to stop it as a watchdog, then he will always believe that he doesn't need anybody, he doesn't need West, because he knows that he has the power over Europeans now, because they have been just tolerating him. They were just going, don't do this is not good, but in fact, they have been tolerating him just to stop the refugee flood, and this is also because of their racist politics of the European Union countries, but everything is just like a domino. They tolerate him, and he goes brazenly violator, and he justifies his crimes over some excuses of being betrayed by the United States or just left over to push back to Russia. But these are, I believe, all the excuses he needed to actually concretize his rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Jim, what would you like to add?
Well, thank you, Paula. And
Yes.
first of all, thank you for inviting me to this Georgetown, George Mason National Security Institute event, and to be a member of such a distinguished panel with John, Maya, and Lisel. When Paula said I'm recently retired, she wasn't kidding. This is my 18th day in retirement. So, as I was telling members of the panel, I'm still getting up at 4:30 in the morning. waiting to go to work and then realizing I don't have to go to work anymore. So again, a pleasure to be here. And because I'm so recently retired, I just want to give a shout out to my former colleagues in the intelligence community, the women and men who work in the IC every day to keep the United States and our allies and partners safe. And also to say, since I'm now retired, these are my personal views and not of my home agency, the Department of Defense or the Defense Intelligence Agency. So with that, I'll sum up everything that we need to talk about regarding Turkey in this phrase. It's complicated. It's very complicated. And in fact, if you notice, I couldn't help noticing on the menu we had smoked turkey sandwich, and so that's what I'm having. Here it is. And given my background, which is 35 plus years in the Department of Defense, I'm going to, by default, because it's in my DNA, kind of give you the defense and security perspective and how, me and my former colleagues in the Pentagon and the intelligence community have looked at Turkey through that defense and security lens. The bottom line is, no surprise here, Turkey lives in a very difficult neighborhood. I recall many years ago, I was in a symposium with President-elect Walesa, the president of Poland, and somebody in the audience asked him, "What do you wish for Poland?" And without hesitation, he said, "I wish Poland bordered Canada." Well, you are a prisoner of geography. Those of you who read Kaplan's book, Revenge of Geography, you can choose your friends, but you can't choose your relatives, and you can't choose your neighbors when you're a country. So you got to have to deal with it. So as we talk today about Turkey's relationship with Russia, Iran, Syria, NATO, it's about geography. I agree with everything everybody has said so far, even the issues that John and Lisel didn't agree on, because I think we're all talking about nuances here. And when we talk about Turkey, we might as well just say Erdoğan. And when we talk about Turkey's foreign policy, we're talking about being driven by one man, and that's Erdoğan. Certainly, he is a product of his own upbringing. He includes all of the characteristics and contradictions of Turkey and its Ottoman past. Turkish foreign policy is highly personalized and transactional to the degree. Every relationship is transactional, but with Turkey, it's extra transactional. And certainly Erdoğan over time, and he didn't start this immediately in 2002, but over time, gradually, you kind of see the veil kind of being lifted, is determined to make Turkey a player on the world stage, certainly a regional power, even a global player. Why is Turkey involved in the Balkans, the Caucasus, Central Asia, Libya, Somalia, for all places, Sudan? And the issue, again, looking through the defense and security lens, you can't help but notice that the Kurdish separatist issue is paramount in Turkey's security calculus. Early on, Erdoğan, with his foreign minister at the time, Davutoglu, unveiled a no problems with neighbors foreign policy. I think we now kind of look at it now and say, well, that evolved from no problems with neighbors with no neighbors without a problem. So that's kind of how it's gone. I think two events, and you could talk about lots of things that have driven Turkey's foreign policy, and I'll put this all in context to talk about Turkey's relationship with Russia, and that is two things: the Arab Spring and the Syrian Civil War. Two huge events that whatever Erdogan's plans were prior to 2010, 2011, 12 period, earlier in the last decade, certainly affected by those two huge seismic events. Where does that bring us with Russia? And I totally agree with Maya when she talked about this issue of trust. There is a significant trust deficit between the United States and Turkey. In fact, the latest Pew Research poll says Some of you may be familiar with it. How many people have a favorable view of the United States or a disfavorable view of the United States? 73% of Turks, according to that poll, have an unfavorable view of the United States. The United States is viewed in the same poll, a majority of Turks, as the #1 threat to their security. Less than Russia, less than China. So this is kind of what we're dealing with. This is the atmosphere that we're kind of dealing with. And when we talk about how do we get this back on the right road, we're going to have to talk about where are we right now? And we're kind of pretty much at rock bottom. What are the other drivers? So there's a distrust factor with the West, not just the United States, but the European Union. This was mentioned. Turkey for many, many years has made entrees to Brussels. They've been given the stiff arm for many reasons. There's always another reason why. Maybe it's not the right time for Turkey to become a member of the European Union. So you had this delicate dance that's been going on for many, many, many years. Energy. Paula talked about energy. Turkey has always wanted to be an energy hub. It's highly dependent on Russia for oil and natural gas. Its geography, again, plays well into this. It's sandwiched between Iran, and you've got Russia to the north, and you've got Europe to the west. What does that sound like? That sounds like, hey, maybe I can be an energy hub. So that has always been a major foreign policy objective of the Turks, predating Erdoğan's arrival. And now you have the Turk Stream project, which is going to be very, very, very important in terms of Turkey's revenue generating and its relationship with Russia. Another area where President Putin and President Erdoğan can see eye to eye. I did mention the Kurdish issue, and certainly the Syrian civil war has unleashed the whole Kurdish separatist issue on another front. I believe Lisel mentioned the fact that early in his tenure, Erdoğan was making overtures as part of this no problems with neighbors, you know, with Assad, sort of trying to ingratiate himself with ethnic Kurds. There was a lot of optimism, I think, in certain circles, certainly in the circles that I operated under, you know, in the defense and security community, that, oh, you know, maybe this ushers in a new era. Maybe we can see a lessening of tensions. And of course, again, we know where that went over the years. The other issue in terms of Turkey-Russia relationships, which Paula talked about, long history of conflict, of lessening tensions, but a lot of history there between Russia and Turkey over the many centuries. But Turkey, again, looking at Russia as a counterweight to the West, always playing a game as to where can I get an advantage, and if I start to show interest in Russia, how does the West, and particularly how does the United States react to that? I like to think, and we can talk more about this in the question and answer period, is, you know, Turkey and the United States are formally allies, both in the NATO alliance. Some have said that Turkey and the United States are allies of convenience. I like to turn that around a little bit and say that Turkey and the United States are inconvenient allies. And what do I mean by that? I believe that we need each other, but at the bottom line, we resent the fact that we need each other, in a sense. We almost resent that dependency that both the United States and Turkey need for each other. So where does that leave us? You see a lot about Turkey is drifting. Turkey is drifting away from NATO. Turkey is gravitating toward Russia. But there is a lot of baggage in that relationship. And I believe a lot of factors that will help mitigate a sort of act between Ankara and Moscow. Security in the Black Sea. The Turks and Erdoğan were very alarmed by the fact that Russia seized Crimea and is now, and has undergone since over the past 5+ years, building up its military footprint in Crimea. For Turkey, that significantly changes the security dynamic. The Black Sea is very important and has always been important to the Turks. And to see that balance of power change in a very significant way, with Russia now occupying Crimea, is very, very significant. Russia's new footprint, or on steroids, their military footprint in Syria, again, not in Turkey's interest, concern about that. They now have to deal with Russia in a way that they didn't have to. That's not something that I personally believe is something that Erdoğan really wanted to see. The more beholden that Turkey becomes Russia in Syria, the more complicated life becomes. And so you have these historic issues, you've got the new twists that are going on here, you've got new competition with Russia and Turkey in Libya, and both are doing a delicate dance where, from Putin's perspective, as Maya said, Putin looks at this as an opportunity, as he always has, of driving a wedge between the United States and Turkey, the West and Turkey. And so it's very easy to explain what Putin is doing. It's a little more complicated to kind of understand or try to surmise what Erdoğan is doing. But I think it goes back to his character, and certainly the panelists to my left know more about Erdoğan's inner psyche than I do. But it's certainly a balancing act. It's a matter of pride. It's a case where Erdoğan and the Turks feel that they need to be respected, that their security concerns need to be taken into account. I think, Maya, you mentioned that the Turks blame the United States for really the instability in the region. You go back to when Turkey Özal, the first Gulf War, and what happened immediately after that. Everybody remember Operation Provide Comfort? A humanitarian disaster which lasted many, many, many, many years. Who was blamed for that? Well, in many ways, Turks blamed the United States for that. Operation Iraqi Freedom, same issue. So really, the United States is not looked at by the Turk man and woman on the street as a security provider, more as someone that undermines their security. All of the problems that they face, they can easily, whether we agree with it or not, but they can easily draw a line back to the United States in terms of, hey, these problems were really caused by you, and you're not respecting our security concerns. When you deal with the YPG, which is the Kurdish issue is an existential security threat to them. Why do you not respect our concerns? So again, I'll leave with that. We can talk more about how Turkey and Russia are maneuvering, but I still think, I believe that there is hope. I believe that Erdoğan still has deep concerns about where Russia is going. They have deep security concerns about an emboldened Russia, and Russia playing an increasing role in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Syria, in the Black Sea. And we'll talk about the way ahead, but I'm just laying the groundwork there. I think there's some room there for hope.
Thank you, Jim and Maya. We have a half an hour left, and so I'll try to be a better moderator now that we've gotten through the first 2 rounds of questions. And we'll ask the panelists to try to keep their comments to about 3 or 4 minutes each. As we now turn our sights to the Syrian civil war and the long war in Iraq. As has been mentioned, powerful ethnic and religious grievances have been unleashed along NATO's southeastern flank. The questions now concern what can Ankara realistically expect to shape by participating in the Astana talks with Tehran and Moscow. And number 2, how likely is Erdoğan to secure a safe zone between Turkey and Syria as part of the Astana talks, or is that issue dead on arrival? So let's go first to Dr. Gannon and then to Jim.
Okay. Well, let me change a little bit of the focus on Turkey and Syria. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because
Right ahead.
I think there is an issue now with regard to what's going on in Idlib that sort of transcends all the other issues. And I think there are three people involved here. You've got Putin, Russia, you've got Erdoğan, and you have Bashar al-Assad. All three of them have in common, by the way, they could be on the same plane leaving their countries if they lose power. They're all desperately power-hungry people. And I certainly said about Putin and Bashar al-Assad having no scruples about whether to maintain themselves in power. But right now in Idlib, you've got over 800,000 people now that have left Idlib heading for the Turkish border. This is a major crisis for Turkey. So they've already got 3 million plus Syrian refugees that they have accepted. My own view is that Erdogan took some risk. And by the way, this to some degree feeds into his desire to be seen as a regional power. But I think he's taken some tremendous risks in this particular, what he's done in this case. Because he had made an agreement with Russia, first of all, that they would defend the enclaves that they were able to negotiate in Kazakhstan and Astana, and they would be preserved. And what Erdogan was after, and this is certainly, in my judgment, rational policy, he was looking for enclaves where he could not only prevent Syrians from having to leave the country, but he could actually send back some of those who it already had. Bashar al-Assad is one of the three. From the beginning and all the way through the discussions, and today says nothing doing. I am driving all of these people out of every one of these enclaves, and we're gonna clean house. And by the way, his view is it's territory, not the people who live on it. So so Russia and Turkey have to deal with Bashar al-Assad in this. Russia has pledged to work with Erdogan to try to preserve. What we've seen in recent weeks, of course, is the Turks have had 12 outposts within Erbil, where they have part of an agreement, again, that Russia was committed to defend. And they've had, I think, 5 of Turkish military officers killed. They are now threatened. It seems to me they're sitting ducks because what and this is where we have to ask, what's the strategy? We know what Bashar al-Assad's strategy is to clean out and so that he can recover full control of all the territory of what was Syria. But for Putin, there is a larger strategy, and that what he wants is continued long-term influence under Bashar's government. It gives Russia an access to the Mediterranean, and he's looking at two particular bases that he is using now, but will like to actually get greater control of. So he's got both a military and political strategy that is much larger than dealing with Turkey. But he also likes the fact that strategy of acquiring these bases and acquiring a long-term influence and or maintaining and building his long-term influence in Syria is a kick in the gut to NATO and to the West, to the United States. And also he likes the fact that there's a perception that he has co-opted Turkey to work with him in Syria and elsewhere. So he's got 2 strikes against NATO in what he is doing. I can't see anything in the way he has behaved or will behave that suggests that Turkey is going to be defended by Putin. And I think the Turks are to some degree sitting ducks now in Erbil as the process. And as I said, coming in here today, it looks like the Russians are back to bombing hospitals and schools, and again, fulfilling the desires of Bashar al-Assad. But let me say again, before I stop, that all of this is happening because the United States, would have had tremendous, I believe, diplomatic influence on the discussions about with our Syria, backed off, created vacuum for Russia to come in and then for Turkey to come in also. And also the United States is doing very little or anything about the tremendous humanitarian disaster that's awaiting the people of Erbil. So I think the absence of U.S. leadership is one of the reasons that we are in the situation we're in now. And I think for Turkey, it is, and for Erdoğan, this is going to be a very difficult problem for them to get out of. So all the other agreements and everything else, I think, are right now not as significant as the urgent disaster that is unfolding in Erbil.
Jim.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Very quickly, I agree with everything Dr. Gannon mentioned. And this issue of a buffer zone obviously is and the refugee problem and the stresses and strains that that's putting on Turkey, the Turkish economy. As we all know, according to UN figures, Turkey is host to the largest number of refugees in the world right now. So big issue. And the Turks have always wanted a buffer zone, whether it's in northern Iraq, to keep the Kurdish insurgency issue, to use their characterization of it, under control. Am I optimistic about the Astana process? As an analyst, I used to tell my junior analysts, make a call, go out there, make a call, yes or no. My feeling is I'm not optimistic about the Astana process at all. And I think even if we do get something on paper, it's not going to last. Essentially what we're dealing with, anybody ever try to do a Rubik's Cube? I'm not very good at Rubik's Cube, by the way. 4 sides is hard enough. I think we're dealing with a 5-sided Rubik's Cube. When you look at what do each of the players in this process want out of the process, I think that's step one, kind of examine what they want. Certainly, Assad wants to reestablish control over all of Syrian territory. The Russians and the Iranians would want a friendly regime in Damascus to them. Assad fits the bill right now, but my feeling is they're not really, particularly Putin, is not necessarily wedded to Assad. Could be somebody else. And certainly Assad one day, like all of us, will leave this world. So they both want a friendly regime in Damascus. What do the Kurds want in Syria? They want autonomy. In terms of foreign troop presence, I was just sitting back the other day jotting out, the withdrawal of foreign troops. Certainly, Syria wants Turkish troops and U.S. troops out of Syria. The Turks want the Russians out of Syria. Russia would like to see us and the Turks out, and we would like to see the Russians and the Turks out. So figure that one out. You might need a pocket calculator to kind of figure out how do you work through all those machinations to come out where everybody is satisfied, or even most people are partially satisfied when it comes out to that. The one thing that we've seen historically over time is when the music stops, it always seems that the Kurds are the ones left standing without a chair. And so we shall see what happens out of this. But I'm probably with medium to high confidence. I feel the Astana process is. I don't think it's not going to mean very much. I think the Turks look at the problem in Syria like they looked at the Kurdish issue in northern Iraq. They've always had a presence there, one way or another. Whether we acknowledge it, whether we want to turn a blind eye to it, whether we tell the Turks, in the case of Syria, maybe they withdraw and they go, and we tell them, don't go back in there, okay? Otherwise we're going to get mad.
Sorry.
And then the Turks feel that their security concerns really are paramount, and they need to conduct some sort of military operation to kind of, as we say in the defense and security community, maybe mow the grass and make sure that things are at a level that is tolerant for them. I'll leave it at that since we have
Thank
not
you.
much time.
Thank you. So for Maya and Lisel, what factors motivated Turkey to suddenly deploy troops to Libya? Help unpack that for us.
Okay. Wow, so many different factors of why Turkish troops are in Libya, and as Maya mentioned earlier, that Turkey is paying Syrian militants to fight in Libya as proxies and offering them citizenship and actually much higher fees than I think it's like 2,000 lira a month or something, like really attractive packages for fighting in Libya to incentivize them to go. Okay, so let me see if I can do this super quick. Turkey has 2 allies in the region. It has Qatar and it has the GNA in Tripoli. Very, very few allies in the region. Because of Turkey's energy issues with Russia, with Iran not wanting to be too dependent on either of them, actually getting 15% of its gas from Iran. Is an important, I think, factor to keep in mind. Turkey wants / believes it deserves a presence in the Eastern Mediterranean and wants to / believes it deserves drill offshore Cyprus, and signed a memorandum of understanding with the GNA in Tripoli that sort of recognized an exclusive economic zone and was meant to kind of be the stepping stone towards allowing Turkey more access into the Eastern Mediterranean. So if the GNA falls, Turkey loses that, and then it's back to Qatar, which is not insubstantial, even given its size. So there's maintaining the presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. There are lots and lots and lots of contracts that Turkey needs fulfilled that it's paid for in Libya that it would lose money on if the GNA falls. There is an affiliation in terms of ideology, in terms of identity with the government. It would like to see more governments that look like the GNA. In addition to the Arab Spring and the Syrian civil war that Jim mentioned in terms of these super foundational or like inflection points, I would also mention the 2013 ousting of Mohamed Morsi. And for Erdoğan to see the GNA gives him hope and potentially gives him another ally in the region. Oil, Libya has oil, Turkey needs oil. And I would argue, I don't know that I have a whole lot of empirical basis for this, but I would argue that Turkey, is trying to assert more of its mediator regional player role, but also was trying to get a little bit of leverage over Russia because of Idlib, and was trying to see if I can establish a presence here, and I know that you are lining up with UAE and Egypt and these other powers. I'm going to see if I can't get a little bit of leverage in Libya that I might be able to negotiate in Idlib, because I do think that is the most important situation for Erdoğan right now. So I would say many.
Thank you. Mike?
I totally agree with Lisel. I just want to add that Erdoğan doesn't want Egypt to be a regional power because of what happened to Morsi that he was supporting, and I believe that, and I had read also that in this resources that so many of Morsi's followers and backers from Muslim Brotherhood are now in Turkey. So he doesn't want Sisi to just succeed in each region. And also, this is also some kind of, he wants to be back to that grandiose Ottoman Empire's legacy. So he always just praised the Abdülhamit II, which was known as a dictator in the time of the Tanzimat, that's reforms, Ottoman reforms. So he always alludes to, refers to Abdülhamit as one of the greatest, monarchs. He sees that region as the legacy of the Ottoman Empire, where he should get back that power over the, countries. And when there are, countries like Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt, getting together, teaming up by leaving out, Turkey outside, he got that as a personal insult. So he got, enraged about that too. And we should also remember probably that Erdoğan Turkey has 3 military bases outside Turkey, which one is in Qatar and the other is in Somalia. And lately, at the time of Omar al-Bashir, which was sent to the International Court of Justice recently, he was just calling him as again my brother, like he did to Bashar al-Assad. So they have signed an agreement to get, to leave this Wakin island in Sudan to Turkey for 99 years. And that was a totally personal agreement, actually, because this is what happens in dictatorships. You don't have any kind of record keeping. And well, actually, the justification and legitimate excuse for Turks, for Erdogan, was that this rebuilt the Ottoman legacy here. But people were afraid that Turkey wanted to get another military base in Sudan, because that particular spot is right across Mecca and Jeddah. And Jeddah was seen as one of the main costs of the Ottoman Empire in Saudi Arabia. So nobody is stupid, because Erdogan always has this tendency to think that everybody else is stupid. So people, especially Egypt, is very much really bothered of this, irritated of this thing. And there's another thing that I'd like to add to Lisel's, is that the biggest risk in Libya is today not to have a bigger conflict for me. It's just like arms and all those mercenaries brought by Turkey. If they it could flood into the Sahel region, and where almost 5,000 French soldiers and more than 14,000 UN peacekeepers are based. So Turkey could just help Islamist mercenaries to do that. So this is going to just cause a bigger conflict that we could even imagine at the very beginning.
Good point. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to leave time for questions from the audience. And so,
so the past, I would say, month, we've seen an increased rhetoric from Turkey trying to pressure Putin to kind of get Assad under control in the Idlib area, to the point where right now Erdogan has a time frame till the end of the month for the attacks to stop in the Idlib area to help with the pretty much the exodus of people going to the border. What do you think is going to be the red line where we see a lot of troop movement from Turkey into northeast Syria, but we haven't seen a lot of, I guess, kinetic engagement, just of setting up operation posts and just force posturing? What do you think at the end of the month, if this doesn't stop, there will be movements that don't stop, Turkey will be willing to engage with their ally Russia in conflict in Syria?
who would like to take that one? That's a good one.
The end of your statement question was
Well,
Turkey engaging in a conflict with Russia on the ground in Syria?
In Syria, yes.
My personal view is that that's Erdogan's nightmare. I don't think he wants to do that. I think Erdogan is doing, again, as you laid out, trying to get Putin to put the screws on Assad to say, hey, dial this back, and recognize what the Sochi agreement was, and what Turkey wants to get out in terms of what it sees as its security requirements there. I don't know. I'm looking very closely to see how much Russia is going to say, okay, that's enough, Assad. He hasn't done that yet. In fact, for me, quite frankly, he's let him unleash him more than I kind of thought he was going to. I thought by now he might. It doesn't seem like that's the case. And it seems more and more that both Russia, and when we talk about Russia, we're talking about Putin and Assad, but they want to establish facts on the ground, and then that's going to give them a much greater position with the Astana process as you establish military facts on the ground. But I don't think Erdogan wants to go in that direction. I mean, that my personal view, and I'll just use this as an opportunity to say, I believe Erdogan has overextended himself everywhere, in Libya, in Syria, and it's going to come back. It's already coming back to haunt him. I think he's very much overextended, both militarily and politically. And, we're going to have to see it.
I just add that I don't think either Putin or Erdoğan actually wanted to have it end up in an outright conflict. But I think what Putin is doing is hoping that Erdoğan will simply read the facts on the ground as they proceed, and they are now proceeding. And Erdoğan has seen that all the other enclaves have been bold, run Russia all over. He's got to see the writing on the wall with regard to what's going on right now. I keep calling it real. I'm sorry for that. My last briefing I did. Idlib. So I think Erdoğan is in a real box now. He's going to have to crawl out of this, and I don't think he's going to get ultimately any help. He'll get a certain leeway from. Putin will cover him as he leaves or do something, but he's not. I think if I were advising, I would have plans to extricate the forces.
I agree too. We only have time for 2 more questions. Who? Go ahead. And then in the back.
So I think, thank you all for being here. An important player that hasn't been mentioned up until the very end, I think, is Saudi Arabia. And where does it fit in this Rubik's Cube of alliances into this entire mess? Because Saudi Arabia is authoritarian and also Muslim and Sunni, and so technically you would think it would fit into the fraternity, but at the same time, I mean, the Saudi population love the Turks, like, population-wise, they love each other, but government-wise, the relations seem to be a bit tense. So I just wanted to know your view.
Well, Saudi Arabia has always been an ally for the United States, so they would stand where the United States stands. But as for Libya, for example, they support Haftar's, forces. So Turkey is almost the only one. If we just Qatar is not, supporting as it did at the very beginning. So Turkey is the only one to support the Sarraj regime, and I believe that Saudi Arabia has always been pragmatic. So they will always be pragmatic with, wherever, the United States want them to go, they will go there. That path.
Super quick, I think it's also worth looking at the fact that Turkey is kind of running up against Saudi Arabia in its bid to be Sunni hegemon in the region. Egypt as well, but definitely Saudi. But Turkey needs to keep a friendly relationship with Saudi. So Mohammed bin Salman called Turkey part of this triangle of evil. During the Khashoggi incident that you brought up, this really came to the fore, and I think Arakon, you saw this drip of intelligence, really hoping the U.S. was going to pick up on it and that they were going to prosecute and fall through because he knew he couldn't, even though Khashoggi was killed in a consulate in Istanbul. But they for construction contracts, for economy, for access to Mecca and Medina, for many reasons, they need to keep that relationship open. What you actually see, so my current book is on politics and pop culture in Turkey, and so I'm writing a paper on how there's this Kingdoms of Fire soap opera that's trying to counter the Ottoman narrative in the region, that's pushing back against the Magnificent Century and all these other ones. So Saudi, and it's an Emirati producer, but it's on Saudi networks, and Saudi has also banned or cut off access to Turkish soap operas as well, recognizing that, exactly as you say, there's an immense affinity among the populations for Turkey, like the tourists in Istanbul taking pictures of where those things were filmed. It's Saudi, right? So I think it's a really important relationship to pay attention to.
One more question.
So with the killing of Soleimani, what opportunities does Turkey hope to exploit, or what challenges do they have now with that?
Turkey and Soleimani. Ooh.
So I think a lot of people were, sorry, I just spoke, but I'll go super quick. I think a lot of people were wondering if Turkey's regional appeal was going to increase for the United States. And part of that was because of these debates over, although I think people in the US weren't actually reading what was happening in the Iraqi parliament and what was actually binding, but they were looking at trying to push US presence out of Iraq, and that would have been Iraq writ large, so it would have been Erbil as well, out of the KRG. And so then the question is incirlik, which the Turkey, consistently says that this is going to close down if an Armenian genocide resolution is passed, or if this. I think that Turkey might have seen that they got a little bit more leverage there. Erdoğan was very cautious on commenting on the killing of Soleimani. Again, Turkey, 15% of its gas comes from Iran. There's an economic relationship between them. They want to have a part in the Astana process, so I think that they're trying to maintain a cordial relationship with Iran. But I think that there was a perception that when that talk was going on about pushing the U.S. out of Iraq, that maybe Turkey's leverage would increase a bit.
So they reflected Soleimani as a martyr, as a, he was a good person, and he was a, very patriotic person who was killed by, some betrayals from the United States. So the same old story with Turkish nationalist policies.
The only thing I'd say real quick, and again, coming from my defense and security perspective, as I said, Erdoğan was very cautious in his comments. The Turks always have to be concerned about what another Iranian reaction to Soleimani could do to destabilize the region in terms of Iranian's threat network. So I don't think that the other shoe is dropped in terms of how the Iranians are going to respond to that killing. And so that always, puts them a little bit on edge.
My own view, just as a little pet project, having run and run operations for a long time with the agency, and watching how Hezbollah and Iran have gotten closer and closer and closer and more permanently closer to the Turkish border is not insignificant to anyone in Ankara. My own view is that they were probably not unhappy to see Soleimani go. He was quite a warrior, and with ground comes more ability to project power into Turkey. So they might not be doing the happy dance in public, but I'll bet nobody misses it. I'll bet you nobody misses it. And that also goes for Nasrallah. So there is that piece of it as well. I really want to thank everyone. I want to thank the panelists for giving up their time and talent. It's a great privilege for us to be here. Thank you for the NSI and to Georgetown for allowing us to have this platform. Have a great day, everybody, and keep studying about Turkey and Russia. Bye.